What's going on, guys? What up? What up? Rajesh, what's going on? Today was a boring day, I ain't gonna lie. This was definitely just atrocious. It was a little expected on my end. And those of you that kind of listened to live this morning, I I think one of the most first things that I pretty much preferenced was that I was not necessarily looking at tech today. And I'm actually kind of glad I did not look at tech today. It was just kind of more so just discussing price action. And after we had the little gap down that we had yesterday, if you want to say meltdown for a better term, it kind of felt like there was no panic on the back end of that meltdown yesterday. And then what ended up happening is that they were likely going to stick us in a box with everyone expecting moves to pretty much continue with Nvidia ahead of their earnings, with Tesla ahead of their stock split. It felt like they were just going to stick us in a box. And that's exactly what they ended up doing today. Let me see something. Okay. So yeah, I mean they basically stuck us in a box. There's a lot of catalysts that's ahead with that Nvidia earnings, with the stock split, with Jackson Hole coming up, with the pretty much an onslaught of some more economic data coming out later on in the week. It kind of feels right after yesterday's meltdown with no panic. It just feels right that they end up sticking us in a box, putting us in a little bit of a range. In which case, now we set up for tomorrow ahead of that Nvidia earnings. Do we see pretty much a run up going into the earnings, or do they just melt it with the market? Do we end up getting a run up with Tesla ahead of their stock split, or do they just melt it and trap the buyers? So I'm on the camp in which I expect the market to pretty much trap everyone that's looking to take the upside in terms of those catalysts. And I think that we're likely going to see another leg down here tomorrow, in which I'll get to my ES chart here on Futes in just a second. But I think those buyers are likely going to get trapped, thinking that there's going to be, with those two catalysts, Nvidia and Tesla, that they're likely going to see some kind of run up into those catalysts. And I think it's going to be the opposite of that end. So I know that a lot of retail traders are likely even looking at Tesla. I think they had the last time they had their stock split, they ran about 13% the day of, basically before that stock split. And that's what I think a lot of retail traders are basically expecting here going into tomorrow. Do I think that history is going to repeat itself? Not necessarily, but that's also the fact why I chose to pretty much stay on the sideline on Tesla and I did not open any kind of position for a swing. So I will actually look to see if Tesla does bleed out tomorrow. I will likely decide whether to be a buyer of that tomorrow if it does indeed bleed out. And I'll get to the levels on Tesla here in just a second as well. But that's where I'll likely look for in terms of the buying opportunity. I'm not necessarily looking to swing that if the opportunity presents itself intraday that we see some kind of rally taking place, then I'll pretty much assess and look for the setup intraday and take the write up. But otherwise, I'm not looking to force, and I think pretty much the opposite is going to happen than the previous stock split. So that's pretty much looking at that. Getting into TS, like I said, we're kind of like had that nice little range bound day. We basically pivot off right off of support here at this 41.18 spot on ES. If we do end up taking another leg down, I do see us coming down towards 40.75 on ES. That's pretty much where my support is kind of lying here right now. That would be my bottom end of the range that I'm looking at is that 40.75 spot. Otherwise, if we're able to manage and hold this 41.18, I'm looking for the bounce in which that's going to stretch us up towards 41.98. And then that'll likely be on the back end of NVIDIA and Tesla kind of paving the way ahead of their catalyst, in which we're going to see a little bit more of a bigger rally than necessarily expected. All right. So that's pretty much the two ranges that I'm looking at. Is the down end at 40.75. The upside here, I'm likely looking up towards right where that 41.98 spot is. All right. So those are the two big key levels. Otherwise, we melt under the 40.75. That's when things are really going to start to get disgustingly ugly. And I don't think the market's really set for that just yet. I think we're likely going to end up having to hear what Jay Powell's going to have to say at Jackson Hole later on this week. And that'll likely cause a bigger meltdown if that's pretty much in the cards here for this week. But if we can't hold 407, I think that brings us down to 39.88, and that's when things are necessarily going to start to get really ugly under 39.88, and then the Bears will likely have their full-on control. I don't expect us to get down to that extreme. I do actually think that we're going to hold the 40.75 on ES, and we should end up seeing a rebound going into the next day. All right. So I'll pretty much that's my range that I'm looking at. I see another leg down here tomorrow is more so the bottom line. Those of you that just popped in, I see another leg down tomorrow, and then we'll pretty much see a little bit of that relief rally on the back end of Nvidia and on the back end of Tesla split. We should see a little bit of relief That's going to be shown on Thursday ahead of Jackson Hole, in which Powell's going to talk. All right. So that's pretty much ES. I said I was going to get into Tesla. I'll get into that right now. Aman, what's going on? Hope you had a good training. Thoughts on the end of day SPX call flows? I didn't necessarily look at the SPX call flows. Are you talking about off of TFC flow? Is that what you're referring to? I don't know if you could probably comment back on that, but I did not necessarily see the SPX flow necessarily. I didn't see anything on our flow on our end of flow, but that was not something that I necessarily caught. Otherwise, it's hard to really say blindly. You probably have to DM me in Discord and show me exactly what you saw, and then for all we know, I don't even know if that's maybe be necessarily a hedge or not. It'll probably depend on what that actually looks like. All right. Let me get into Tesla real quick then, and I'll take a peep and let you know what my levels are on Tesla here. Big thing that I basically want to point out, of course, before I get into the smaller levels here, is the bigger dynamic of what Tesla looks like. One thing you can see off the bat is that you basically have a nice little descending broadening wedge. Those of you that are pretty much aware, that's usually one of my favorite patterns to pretty much trade. If I just draw the white lines here, you can pretty much see you have a nice little descending broadening wedge type of action going on here on the larger degree. This is the daily time frame. So if I pretty much draw that out, you can basically see you have a nice little descending broadening wedge, a declining resistance, declining support as it gets broadening towards the end of that entire pattern. Now, going into basically another endpoint in which helps me identify more so my target once we do start to see Tesla ramp up, whether that be ahead of the stock split or on the back end of the stock split. If you see the little small circles, the little green bubbles, that basically has been prior levels in which we have smacked numerous times. And that is actually the 978, 980 spot that we hit multiple times. So you actually see dating back to November of last year, we smacked it as support. We hit again December of last year, we smacked it as a resistance before breaking back down. We hit support again, that was January of this year. Again, had a breakout, retested as support, and that was in March of this year before follow through on that breakout. And then we ultimately ended up breaking down here in April, end of April, before we flushed out. So I do think it's very fitting that we end up at whatever point that we see this rally before or after the stock split, that we end up retracing right back up towards that 978, 980 level. And I would expect that it ends up retesting as a resistance. And whether that ends up being the downfall, with obviously knowing that the market bottom has not actually yet been defined, I think that it's likely going to end up testing as our resistance for that 978, 980 spot. All right. So that's what I'm more so looking at in terms of that. I do think that we'll likely get up to 980 spot. It's just a matter of when is more so the question mark. I'm more in the camp in saying that we end up retesting this bottom end of this range, this 856, 855 spot, and then that'll likely be a buy the dip type of opportunity, and we will see this rally more so on Thursday rather than tomorrow. But nonetheless, if we do have upside targets here, if we're able to reclaim over this 892 spot and we can break over 901, then we could see this start to really give us a bigger push. You have a little bit of resistance right around that 918 spot. Then you have resistance at 943. And then we can start to see this push up towards 952. And that'll likely give you that extension of the push up towards that 978, 980 spot. All right. So that's what I'm looking like again. I mean, it all depends how they necessarily play this. Do we see a dip before the stock split and then the rally after the fact? Or do we just see that rip going right into tomorrow, right into that stock split? And that's pretty much the bigger question mark. So playing it level by level, that's pretty much the biggest key. I'm not trying to force a situation to happen on an overnight basis, and that's why I chose not to necessarily swing any kind of position on Tesla. All right. So that's looking at Tesla. Jesse, what's going on? Amon, you said my friend uses Blackbox and sent me some of the screenshot of 4160 for 824. Um, that's kind of tough to say. That 4160. I think he may be a little bit earlier on that. Because that's a very close bet in terms of that's within the next 24 hours here of saying that we're going to see a rally tomorrow. And I'm pretty sure a lot of people are anticipating that rally. And that's what I was pretty much starting off on and saying that I think everyone is expecting NVIDIA to go crazy ahead of their earnings. We're expecting Tesla to go crazy ahead of their stock split. I don't think that's necessarily the case. And so whether that ends up being not necessarily a type of sell order, that may end up being pretty much end up going to a waste. It all depends. I'm in the camp where I don't think that we see the rally for those two, catalysts that's likely going to end up carrying this rally. I think we'll see it on the back end of their catalyst, and that's where I'm at with it. All right. So anything can happen tomorrow necessarily. I think a lot of people are taking the over on versus the under on SPY and the market melting down. I personally think that there's another leg down tomorrow before we see a rally on Thursday. All right. Let me get to about BA. BA is pretty much sitting in. It's a little bit of a tough spot. I'm actually looking for support to hold here though at this 159 half. You basically see that you'd hover that level for most of the day. That 159 half needs to hold. Otherwise, you're going to confirm breakdown under 158, and that takes us down to 154.33. Otherwise, if we're able to take out today's high over this 161.70 spot, I'm looking for completion of gap fill up towards 166.84. And then that'll put me into my resistance that I have sitting at 165 is what I'm particularly watching. All right. So I do think that you're likely going to end up seeing this come down to that 154 spot before we see a reversal. If that's pretty much inclined to where I'm expecting the market to take another leg down tomorrow, I would likely anticipate that we see the leg down to 154, and then we'll see a bigger bounce to the upside in which we would still be aiming more so towards that 165 to retest as a resistance. So, but again, playing it level by level, we see if we end up flushing under 158, or do we get the breakout here that's above 160, 170. All right. Let's see what else. Jesse, what's going on with Apple? Heard some things about Apple. I know that Tom was actually holding Apple puts. I heard Dapper talking about Apple with a candle, but I actually do have Apple coming down just a bit more, at least tomorrow. I have it coming down to 165.70. That's what I'm looking at for support on Apple. I think that'll likely end up presenting itself as a potential buy the dip type of opportunity, Jesse. Looking at Apple, so 165.71, that's the level I would look for to see a meaningful reversal tomorrow, and that's where I think you'll see the bounce off of that particular level. Otherwise, if we can't hold 165.71 here, then you're likely coming down to 163 flat, which is 163.09, and then below that, that's when things really start to get uglier because then that's going to be an onslaught towards the downside, and then you're basically looking at towards a 50% retracement of this entire ascending channel action that we've had through this entire rip that's basically started from basically the end of June there. All right. So that's what I'm at with Apple. In terms of holding that 165.71, you can basically see the nice gap fill that you have for the upside, sitting above that 170 spot. And I would not be surprised to retest 171 as your resistance, and then you should see this take the next leg down. All right. Corey, you saw the Apple puts too scared to swing. I don't blame you. I actually swung things that were outside of tech. That's why that was the first thing I preferenced myself by saying on live this morning. I did not want to look at tech this morning, especially knowing that and feeling like we were going to get set in a box with so many catalysts on the back end of this going into tomorrow, with Nvidia and Tesla being a wild card ahead of their events tomorrow, their catalyst tomorrow. That's why I prefer not to look at a lot of these tech names because it really felt like they were going to sit us in a box. And if you look at a lot of these names off my watch list here on off to the right, a lot of them literally were just stuck in a range. A lot of them are up maybe a dollar to two, or they're down a dollar or two, because they literally just ate premiums alive for most part. All right. Other than that, let's see what else. V, you mentioned UNH. I haven't necessarily been swayed by UNH necessarily breaking down too much. I think you basically hit a nice little support level here on UNH. So I'm more inclined to say that you're gonna get a bounce on UNH here. You should end up seeing this break over this 536 half. Is where I'm gonna look for continuation on this little reversal that you had from the low of the day here today. I think you'll get that break over the 536 half. If you do get that break over 536 half, then your overhead resistance you're watching here is up to 541. So then that's going to be whether we end up heading shoulder off of this. You can basically see the left shoulder. You can see the head, and if you do get this bounce up towards 541, probably stretch up towards 543, and maybe wick it towards the right shoulder here at the peak, and then this should end up curling right back down. So I think you might be a little bit early if you're trying to force the downside here, bouncing off of the key support off the low of the day here today. I would wait, particularly look to short this off of 543, 541 on the low end, and then that's likely when you're going to see this curl right back down and then break this trend line support. All right. I already went through Apple with Jesse, and then you mentioned EMPH. Let's take a peep at EMPH. I know Energy had itself quite a day, and I did not even realize I ended up charting this before. We had the nice little pennant. We ended up breaking below the pennant. I actually had my demand zone highlighted right here with an arrow, which I'm about to delete, and we could basically see we came right down to that demand zone. We wicked below it, but the body of the candle held, which was the most important part, at that 276 level, and you can now start to see the reversal. So I would look for another leg up here, especially since I'm particularly bullish on the energy sector as well. I think you do see another strong leg up here. Look to pretty much take out this high of the day at that 287 flat that it's currently sitting at, and then you should start to enter this gap fill. But resistance sitting right around this 292 spot is what I would be cautious about. So you could likely end up seeing a pretty strong gap up and maybe an early morning pump on the MPH, but I would not necessarily look for a continuation beyond tomorrow, maybe midday. So don't try to necessarily force it. It could be a little bit of a morning gap up that's pretty maybe extreme for that case. If we do see a leg down on tech, that'll likely end up showing that energy's gonna have continuation of strength like it did today. But the question is how long it's gonna last is gonna be the question mark, which I don't think you necessarily see it beyond about half of the day tomorrow. All right. So that's what I'd be cautious about. But 292 would be my resistance. That's where I would look to pretty much look to take profits, depending if you're able to get an entry for that upside. Otherwise, 292, you look for the basically the break back down because that will basically be your retest of breaking prior trendline support. So that 292 would act as your resistance, and then you look to take this right back down, in which you should end up flushing right under 287 half. All right. So that's the MPH. Um, let's see what else. A little bit of everything. Microsoft. Let's take a peep. I don't think I looked at Microsoft today. Actually, no, I did not. I have not looked at Microsoft at all today. I actually have support sitting at this one though. Very noticeable support sitting right around this 273 half. So we could see about a $3 move to the downside tomorrow, particularly. And why did I pretty much say that is because you can very much noticeably see this is also aligns with what was your prior peak or prior support as well. And just trying to get a line across. Why did that not do that? There we go. You can basically see as well that's also acting as a prior support that dates back to May 5th. You basically saw the flush right below that level, and then you ended up acting as a resistance here dating back towards June 6th of this month, last month basically, well, 2 months ago. You ended up smacking that same resistance at 274. So I would anticipate 274 is going to act as your short-term resistance, your short-term support, and that'll likely set up for a reversal coming into Thursday. All right. So downside, look for the 274. If you do overextend here, then it's likely that you could see this extend down towards 271. If we do wick further on the downside, so 274 would be my hard level support in which you'll likely see the daily body of the candle hold tomorrow, but you could extend down towards the low of the day here, up down towards 271 half is what I would look for. All right. Otherwise, if you end up holding the 274 here, like I'm pretty much anticipating, I would look for take this back up, and then you're gonna look for 278.31 is you're gonna be your overhead resistance. All right. Joy, you mentioned IWM. I haven't looked at IWM either. I believe Tom is actually holding puts on IWM. If I'm not mistaken, I believe he also swung them as well, which I think he actually swung a lot of puts. I think he swung Apple puts, IWM puts, and I don't remember what else. But I know he swung IWM and Apple. Those two I actually remembered. But looking at support here off of the Russell here, I'm looking for us to pretty much close in down towards this 189 spot. 189 would be where I'm looking at for support. If we end up overshooting to the downside, I actually have this coming down towards 187 half is what I'm looking at. If we do overshoot to the downside, so 187 half. Otherwise, you look for this to pretty much hold 189, and then reversal will take place particularly, and you will look to take this back up above 192, in which you can see the stretch up towards resistance sitting right around this 194 spot. All right. So that's what I would look for on that one. Other than that, again, we have the Nvidia earnings coming up tomorrow. We have the Tesla earnings. Let's see if we get the run up, which I think everyone is anticipating. And that's why I'm more inclined to say that I don't think that's going to be anticipated as expected. We likely see the leg down tomorrow, and then we'll rally into Thursday ahead of Jackson Hole, basically, is what I would pretty much expect. All right. He swung K Web calls. I think I heard Dapper talking about the fact that China actually looked pretty solid. Actually, I don't like that. I mean, I don't mind that. I think it's a pretty nice move that he ended up making. You can basically see the smaller time frame, the 2 3 hours, like you're gonna end up showing you that it did break downtrend. So I see why he particularly got into it. You also pretty much see the body of the candle that's basically peaking right over the downtrend resistance. So I particularly see why he ended up getting into that. You do have your overhead supply that's sitting right around that 29 flat. So I think that should be more than meaningful enough for him to likely end up getting profits once he ends up hitting that resistance at that 29 level. But if he ends up breaking 29, that's when things can start to really get interesting. And then that'll be able to stretch up towards 29 half, in which I don't know what strike he necessarily hold, but 29 to 29 half, I'm pretty sure he'll probably be very happy with taking profits at that point. All right. Ahmad CAAS had a strong push today. Another China name. That one I'm not too familiar with. I'll be honest with you, but I will take a look at the chart and see what it looks like. What the hell is this? Goddamn. All right, I was not familiar with this chart. I have no idea what this is, but that is some vertical action going on there. You definitely caught me off guard looking at that. Now looking at supply here, which is pretty much just noticeable to me right off the bat here, is looking right around this $5 mark. That's pretty much where I see your overhead supply is sitting at right now. So I would not be surprised if this ends up seeing continuation. You have basically your support sitting right at this 432 spot. So $4.32. That looks to be your meaningful support that you're looking at is at 432. As long as you hold 432, I think you should make your way up towards my supply zone that's sitting right at $5 up towards 508 spot, in which I would expect your overhead resistance to likely end up giving you a break back down. All right, that's a hell of a chart. I wish I would have caught that a hell of a lot earlier. But yeah, that's a pretty nice chart. That's actually a beautiful one to actually hold shares on, especially when it's so cheap like this. I would rather just hold some shares rather than trying to force the options, which I don't know if they necessarily have options or not. But I would have loved to hold shares on this had I actually caught it when it actually broke over this 320 mark. That was pretty much a very key supply level previously. That was the level to pretty much go long on this. It was over that 323 mark, and that's a hell of a push you've had so far. So I ideally, if you're not holding it right now, which you just said you took a partial off today at 4:30, if you took a partial, I mean, I don't necessarily condone pretty much adding or averaging down necessarily, but if this ends up retracing back down towards that 432 spot, I wouldn't necessarily mind actually adding to the position, as I still think that you have a little bit more upside here up towards that $5 mark. $5 to 508 is what I would say, and which I would say make sure you secure your profits at that point in time. All right. Huso looks interesting as a rejected at resistance. Let's take a peep at Huso. HUSO. Why did that not come up? HUSO. Are you sure you got that ticker right? Definitely not coming up. Why is that? Why is that? I have not looked at that ticker either. Quite weird that it's not coming up. I'll see. I'll get back to you. If anything, just drop me a message in Discord. But, um, okay, then that's the reason why. HUSA is the ticker. Energy. I mean, energy is hot, so I can't blame you for looking at this one. Let's see. If I probably get down towards the 4 hour. Probably gives me a better window. All right, yeah, you have pretty much some pretty heavy supply sitting up here. I don't necessarily like this one particularly. You have supply sitting right around this 5.63 mark is what I'm looking at. So 5.63 doesn't necessarily give you a lot of room to really mess with this. That might end up being a pretty hard rejection spot at that 5.63, and I would be very cautious. I like the other ticker a lot better in terms of upside. Looking at the other one, I think you have a lot more upside than looking at HUSA. So HUSA again, 5.63. I think that's a hard level to pretty much break over. It's already had a pretty monster rally from what is this like 3.5. So I would say your upside is more limited here in terms of trying to break north of that supply. I think it's like you're gonna end up needing to get a little bit of a breakdown, see if for some kind of more formation ends up happening before you break north of that. But 5.63, that's the mark that you really want to end up paying attention to. All right. So that's pretty much USA. Other than that, again, I think tomorrow's going to be an interesting day. But I do think that bears are likely going to have their fun tomorrow, especially those that probably swung some puts overnight. Like I know that Tom pretty much swung those Russell puts and the Apple puts. And then he has China to pretty much counteract, in which China looks pretty solid right now. And we've seen China actually have some pretty solid days, even when the market ends up having a red day. All right, but just something just smells fishy about the fact that having two catalysts with Tesla stock split and Nvidia earnings as well, something feels fishy about everyone maybe more so having FOMO going into those catalysts rather than seeing a strong rally on the back end of those catalysts. Is more so what I would favor. All right, so we'll see how that ends up playing out. Other than that, though, I will call it a wrap there. Appreciate you guys joining as always, but I will see you guys on live tomorrow morning.